Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
My friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. And we are we are here, season 7 of the Being Known podcast. And, you know, I can't even... How did we get to season 7?
I don't know.
How did we get here?
I don't know, but I can tell you this: it has been so humbling to go places. Sorry, Amy just sent a text that just nearly had me falling out of my chair. Okay, but I'm going to keep going, and
yes.
because I want to say that every place that I go. The podcast is the leading edge of the work that I'm doing, and this is the medium that people are accessing, and they're able to quickly pass it on to other people. It's different than say, hey, you should buy that book, and whatever. But the ease of access of this, and I think one of the other things that that's, and this is germane to our conversation today and this series, the main thing that people highlight is they talk about the our relationship, yours, mine, Amy, together, that really brings life to the material that we're talking about. And so I just want to say that 2 years ago, I never would have dreamed that we would be in this place. Right. Launching our 7th season, I wouldn't have dreamed that we would have. I don't know how many downloads we now have. How many, roughly?
The last I checked, it was 1.8 million.
Dude. I who knew? Yeah.
I mean, honestly, when we started, I think I said to Amy, if we get 400 people to listen, that'll be awesome.
That'd be awesome.
I mean, really, 1.8 million.
Yeah,
it's just
yeah. So I'm just it continues to be humbling, and we want to continue to steward this, and we're grateful for our audience, for your listeners, you all who are out there who are taking in this material and are encouraging us and giving us hope and energy to continue to do this work. So thank you so much for our listeners as well.
Yeah, indeed. This season is going to be about confessional communities, which we talk a lot about on the Being Known podcast. And so the title of this season is Confessional Communities, Practicing for Heaven. And like you said, Kurt, I think so much of what is happening here on this podcast, you're teaching a certain teaching a certain subject, but we're living that subject at the same time.
Yeah,
it's really. I was thinking about it this morning. It's just a mirror of the lessons that's happening in real life, in real time.
Yeah,
and that's very cool. So today's episode is Confessional Communities, Forming Outposts of Beauty and Goodness.
Yeah. Well, I think we've said this is going to be a mini series.
Yes,
and so it's not going to be as they're probably not have as many episodes in the series, and our episodes themselves will be not quite as long, so people won't have to put up with my yammering for as long as you want to be burdened with this for as much time. But we would just say that we really feel compelled to offer this series on confessional communities. There's been so many questions and requests about it. And so we want to provide our listeners with a more detailed, kind of a deep dive into this process. At the same time, we just reflect that for kind of continuing to immerse ourselves in it, this is material that we cover in The Soul of Desire. The last 2 or 3 chapters are really kind of where most of this sits. And so if, for just a slower paced reflection and reading about it, that's where you can find information about that there. And the other thing I want to highlight from the beginning is that in this series, we're not explicitly giving you an experience. We're not giving you an experience of being in a confessional community out, for our listeners. In these are not a substitute for that.
Right.
We want, though, to highlight a lot of what happens in these. And I think one thing I would invite us to consider is, what you said earlier, Pepper, that people have talked about our relationship, and it's been fruitful for me as well. This relationship that we have is so much of what the energy that helps me even continue to do this. And so I want listeners to be curious about and even pay attention to the dynamics that they hear, like in our relationship, in our conversation. Notice that what we're really trying to provide is a real-time example of that in some way, shape, or form. At the same time, there are at least two other opportunities. As one of the most common questions that we have is like, well, where can I find one? Where can I get into one? Where can I find this?
Right.
And there are two opportunities that we want to highlight. One is through the Center for Being Known, and that is this nonprofit that we organized a number of years ago. That one of its offerings now is a conference that is going to be held in October. And our third one is going to be coming up this October, the last Friday in October. At the same time, it also offers training in confessional communities. And we now have our second cohort that has started with that. We have 18 groups. There are almost 200 people that are involved in these groups. And so that's a way for you to have an opportunity for supervision. And then the other offering is through the private practice that I'm part of called New Story Behavioral Health. And there we give an even more immersive experience. It's an immersion training. It's 2.5-day training. And it's for a smaller group of people. It's for about 25 folks or so. And we are moving to doing that particularly for clinicians in the next offering that we have that will be coming up this fall. That date will be announced here very soon. So those two offerings, the Center for Being Known and New Story Behavioral Health. And of course, if you have questions, you can ask about how to get it. I would say, you can go to thecbk.org. That's for that, and or New Story Behavioral Health. They both have websites that you can
We'll have those linked in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So you can just go there and click on it, and they'll take you right to where you need to be.
Yeah. So in today's episode, I want to just do a bit of a broad overview about what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
When we talk about confessional communities, what are we talking about? As is our custom, we say that this process of being known is one that takes place with our understanding that we live in the context of the biblical narrative. Like we're living in the story of the Bible. That's what we believe. Now, not everybody in the world thinks that they're living in that story. And we would say that what we're trying to do in confessional communities is to recap, is to redo, is to start what we read about in the first 2 pages of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2, that God is a creator of beauty and goodness, and that even when things go wrong, he intends to finish what he starts, even if he has to keep starting over and over and over. And dude, I think about my own life. How many times do I think to myself, when is God going to be done with this project with me? He's like...
It's the guys are the construction guys that just never leave. It's just,
no, they never leave.
Got to keep doing the work. Got to keep doing it. Here they come again.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking, if I'm God, I'm thinking gosh, how many? Okay, let's see. Okay, we're going to try this again with Kurt to see if he can get it. It's like Abraham. I got lots of tries with this dude. Right.
Right.
And so even though we live in a world of trauma and carnage and all the things, God is not giving up on his project. And what he's really doing is leading us, we would say, this renewed Eden. When we listen to the guys at the Bible Project, which we highlight on occasion here, they talk about this notion. Tim Mackey likes to talk about this notion that, Eden was a place, and within Eden there was a garden. And so you've got the wilderness, you've got Eden, and then you've got the garden, these three things. And the garden was on a mount. The garden was on a hill. And this notion that if you read throughout the text of the Bible, like it is an elevated space. It is a garden on a hill. It is to be a place where people lift their eyes. It is a place where people are going to go to create beauty and goodness. And when that didn't go well, when that project didn't go well, then you get to the next mount, which was Ararat, and everything. Our listeners are like, excuse me, what? So this is where Noah. This is where the ark comes to rest, and then from you have Moriah, and what's where this is the mountain that Abraham climbs to sacrifice, the potential sacrifice of his only son, and from there you go to Horeb, which is where Moses meets God in the burning bush, and then you go to the Mount of Sinai, where God meets Moses, and then you have the tabernacle, and then you have Jerusalem, right? The tabernacle, this tent, but then you have Solomon's temple. But then you have Mount Tabor. This is the transfiguration. Jesus, Peter, James, and John. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. And then you have the Mount of Olives, which is where, the New Testament text would suggest from where Jesus ascends, the ascension. This notion that God has a vision for creating a community it is a mount. It is a thing to which we lift up our eyes, where He is going to create beauty and goodness in the world, and it is throughout the Scriptures. It's through the whole arc, and that these significant mountains in the biblical narrative are important events that take place, and this is what we want to be about in these confessional communities. We're practicing for the new Jerusalem that's coming. And this whole notion that also sits with another assumption, and that is that, like, I long for a world of goodness and beauty. And my challenge is that I feel like, oh, I'll decide what that should look like, and I'm going to go make it happen on my own. Kurt's going to do it. Dude,
how's that working out for you?
Oh, dude. I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, like, look at this podcast. This podcast is a feature of, like, I don't do this without you and Amy. It just doesn't happen. Like, you all come for me. Like, and I think about, we've talked about this before here. The number of times when Amy has and when you have come for me when I've been in places that have just not been very pretty. And you think, if you're Abraham and you've got the knife ready to go, and it can't be a very pretty place for him.
Yeah.
And God comes for him. And you think of Golgotha, a mount on a hill outside of Jerusalem. Most people would look and say, well, God didn't come for Jesus. Like, after 6 hours, the dude is dead. But Jesus doesn't raise himself from the dead. God raises Jesus from the dead. Confessional communities are places where we come so that other people become the voice and hands and bodies of God to raise the parts of our life from the dead that are dead. And that transformation, if that's going to happen, it requires other people to be in our lives as we make choices to follow Jesus. Like, I can't. We'll get to this a little bit more when we talk about mirror neurons and mimicking behavior. But we need others to come to find us. Like, my salvation requires me to be an agent. I have to make the decision, but I can't get it done on my own. It's not possible for my brain to do it. It's not possible for my body to do it. And confessional communities become a place. It becomes yet one more of these new Edens. It's a representation. We are practicing for the thing that is really coming. And part of how we get that done, and we'll be exploring this over the time that we're together, part of how we get that done, we talk about different languages that we have to practice, different things that are all converging in this space. And the space itself we'll talk about in a little more detail in our coming episodes. But the first thing is that we just emphasize that it's the biblical narrative that is the foundation. And it's not just the text, it's not just the Bible, but it's the person behind that text. And as we've said in previous series, that we're kind of like we are paying attention to what we learn again from the guys at the Bible Project. That we're talking about God-human text that is ancient Jewish messianic meditative wisdom literature. And all of those words are important because we really do believe that what we do in the confessional community is a mirrored image of what every single one of those words represent as far as the Bible itself is concerned. So being immersed in the text of the scriptures is a critically important part of this because we're being formed. Interpersonal neurobiology, that's another element of this. We've talked an awful lot about that over the course of our series together, the 9 domains of integration. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're really looking at the material world, right? So the biblical narrative, the material world, group psychotherapy processes and dynamics. We like to say that this is the third piece of this, that things happen in the room where it happens.
Right.
To steal a line.
Yeah.
Right? And we are people who are very heady and we like to live in our heads, but the moment that we start to bring all of that into real time and space and name things that are happening in the room right now in real time and space, that's where things begin to change. We discover that there are lots of layers of reality in human relational interactions. I'm sitting here in the room with you and I'm thinking about something else, and you might not know that. But if you say, Kurt, what are you thinking? Now I bring my full self into the room. And that's when things begin to change. But I'm not going to be doing that if somebody's not paying attention to the fact that multiple layers of relational dynamics are taking place at the same time. Not unlike an orchestra. And we'll talk more about that as well. That this is a complex system. This is all part of the group psychotherapy dynamics, that things happen in the room, that there's multiple layers of those relational interactions. That it's a complex system, but it has simple energy sources. And by that, we say that we are people who have great longing. We are people who have great grief. We are people who long to be people of joy, but we are prevented from that by virtue of our fear and our shame. We talk about how life is actually very simple and excruciatingly difficult. But it's not difficult because it's complicated. It's difficult because of how much fear and how much shame we carry with us. And so one of the things that we really then want to try to do or become, we want to become people who are multilingual. We want to talk in all these different dialects that we've just listed, from the biblical narrative to neuroscience to group psychotherapy work. All these things are in play as part of how we are being formed. And we'd say that so the different languages that we're going to learn, and this is part of what we learn in these confessional communities. And we say that language is a function of culture, like language represents culture. And so we are going to learn, we live in a culture, the culture that we typically operate in is a culture that helps us practice not being very wise. It helps us practice being distracted. It helps us practice paying only attention to myself. It narrows my scope of attunement and awareness of the world. This is going to be a process that learns multiple different languages so that we can see things that we couldn't even imagine seeing before. And so therefore we become aware of all these things that are happening, and that not only that, but we're not just going to notice things that happen in the confessional community. We come to recognize that everything that happens in that confessional community is happening at Safeway. It's happening in the bedroom. It's happening in the kitchen. It's happening in the boardroom. It's happening in church worship services. It's happening everywhere. What's different about confessional communities is that here we are explicit about it. We're just going to be honest about what's actually happening, and we're not going to pretend that we're something other than who we are. The mission of these confessional communities is that we become formed into the image of the King. And so it's a formational process. We are formed. We don't form ourselves. We participate. We have agency, as we said before, but we are not by ourselves ultimately the masters of the process. We are being formed by the community that we are embedded in. And that's going to be true no matter what. So the real question becomes, what is the community in which you're embedded? Is it your Facebook community? Because I'll tell you, if that's the case, like, dude, we could go on and on about the trouble that's going to cause. Real briefly, we've got two texts that are going to be examples of like how this kind of happens for us, just to get us started. And again, this is to get us started to help us start to percolate and be curious about like how we're using the biblical narrative and how that applies. The first is Luke 24. Many of you are familiar with this story. There's these two guys that are walking to Emmaus, and they come upon this third dude. They don't know who he is, and he starts talking to them about what the events were in Jerusalem. This is the Sunday of the purported. They've heard rumors that this Jesus that they followed had been, he'd been crucified, resurrected, and this dude is walking with him, and he's talking about the scriptures and so forth. And they're like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And he has to go on, and they invite him in for dinner, and he breaks the bread and gives thanks. And the moment that he does, their eyes are opened. And at that moment, he also disappears. It's important for us to pay attention to this, that he had been talking to them for their entire walk, but things didn't happen for them until the bread was broken. It's important for us to pay attention to. Then we get to John 20. Thomas, who had not seen Jesus with the rest of the gang at his first appearance, is in the room where Jesus appears again. And many of you may know this story, that Thomas is invited by Jesus. Look at my wounds. And we come to find that, Thomas didn't just need to believe that Jesus was alive. Thomas actually also first needed to believe that Jesus was dead. He wasn't there. They all took off. They all took off like who knows what happened to him. It's not until Thomas sees Jesus' wounds that Thomas believes. It's not just that he sees him alive. He sees the evidence that he was dead.
Yeah.
And we're going to come to find out that our transformation and our coming to life is as much about our wounds as it is about our strengths. Belief only changes when first there is a change in the material world. Until I can reveal to you in real time and space, in the room with you, what is true about my life, I'm not going to make changes. It's not going to be enough for me just to hear a sermon. I'm going to have some kind of material interaction with other people before my belief begins to change. And this change takes place in the context of community. So for today, we've got a couple of things. One is an artistic offering, and that is the Renaissance painter Carravaggio has a painting of Thomas that we invite our listeners.
I'm looking at it right now. It's
dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would invite people to, you can find this online very easily, and it's, may not replace standing in front of it, but it's a pretty crystal clear representation of what that painting is, and the light and the whole thing. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But I would invite them to sit in front of this for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
And see how it affects you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think for me, I came to recognize that Thomas needed both his brothers and he needed Jesus for Thomas to believe, for Thomas to be transformed, and he needed to be able to have an encounter with his wounds. And go ahead.
I love that in the painting, Jesus has got his hand, and he's guiding Thomas's hand actually into the wound.
I mean, dude,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh. Yeah, right to the very wound, Jesus is going to go with him. Yeah. Like physically go with him.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And we have an application for this week?
Yeah, we do. So we've been hinting at this notion that these confessional communities are really about doing embodied work. It's not work in our head, off on isolation by ourselves. It's embodied work that we do together. And so today, I want to invite us to begin to practice making observations. And we've talked about the shorthand for what our minds do, that we sense, we image, we feel, we think, and we behave. That SIFT-B acronym. I just want to invite you to reflect on those things when you sense yourself, sensing, imaging, feeling, thinking, and behaving. And what of those things, when you notice them, do you recognize, oh, I keep these things to myself. I'm not sharing this with anybody else. And this is not a critique. This is not to say, oh, you should be sharing. It's just to say, oh, start to take an inventory of how much of your mental life happens in the privacy of your own mind and is not really ever given access. Other people aren't given access such that it can be transformed. And so part of how we can begin to open ourselves to transformation is just beginning to be curious about, oh, up until now, what part of me have I been working really hard to keep from being transformed without even knowing that that's what I'm doing? And then beginning next in our next episode, we'll be talking in some more detail about what do we begin to do with all those parts of us that we have been conveniently keeping hidden from everyone else, instead of coming into the room where Jesus wants to take our hand and go with us into the woods.
That's beautiful, Kurt. Yeah. All right. That's a little taste of what's to come in this mini season that we're doing here. Hope you all are enjoying it as much as I am. And I would love to invite you to stick around if you're watching us on YouTube for Amy to join us here. Kurt, I love you. Until next
right back
week.
at you. Right on, brother.
Hey, Amy.
Hey guys. I'm excited about this season, and oh my gosh, it goes quick.
It does.
Yeah.
I could feel the time difference.
Yeah, I could feel the taskmaster getting after us.
I felt like I was like, okay, yeah, go. Well, that 20-minute one I sent earlier.
I know, but I looked down at the beginning of our thing, like, oh my gosh, she's serious. Like, you've got 20 minutes.
Two things hit me, and they're similar. And one of them was, Kurt, when you said these confessional communities we will be formed by these confessional communities. And then, we will be formed by any community.
Right. We're being formed no matter what.
Right, we're being formed. So it's not like, okay, the confessional communities, we can choose that. We can choose that, but we're choosing. No matter what, we're choosing how we will be informed.
That's right.
Or be formed.
Yeah, right.
And then the other thing, which is also I thought about this morning as I was thinking about the episode, is that like this is hard work. It is risky business. It is scary because we're being vulnerable. But a friend of mine said, she said, it's the right hard work. Meaning this is the life-giving work. This is, because we work hard. No matter what, we're working hard. It's hard work. And we get to choose which work we do.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the idea of when you were talking about culture and how, the outside culture is forming us all the time. And so it's actually creating a culture, though, right? I mean, this culture where all of this can happen.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's what this episode was introducing was the ingredients to what that culture can be in the confessional community.
That's right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I am Andy Crouch has one of the first books that it might have been the first book that he wrote that put him on the map, maybe called Culture Making, and nobody that I know of in the Christian community is better equipped, I think, right now than Andy to speak into so many different things that our world is encountering. And one of the beautiful things that he talks about is that we are not called to somehow transform the culture around us. It's not my job to go into the world and fix the world. What I am called to do is to create a world. I'm called to not transform, not change culture, but to make culture. I am called to create a way of being. We are planting new Edens. We are planting new gardens in Edens. As we are just the next extension of these different mountains that are placed significantly over the course of the arc of the biblical narrative. And for me, for any single human being to live effectively in the world, I need to know that I am going out into the world to live with the heft of whatever culture is that's behind me and around me. And most of the culture that is outside of the Garden of Eden is a culture of devouring. It's a culture of taking. It's a culture of disintegration. And so if that's the culture that I'm going to expect to support me, I'm a dead man. But when we are creating these kinds of cultures in the confessional community that we're trying to create, it's like I take the two of you with me. I take the two of you with me, and it makes profound differences in the moments, in the small moments in which I choose to hold my tongue instead of not holding my tongue, in which I choose to be curious instead of condemning. I mean, there's dozens of moments every day where, because I imagine Pepper and Amy being with me, and you all, I know that you have others as well, like we have other parts of our community, because of that, I can pause and wait to receive from the tree of life rather than taking from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Dozens and dozens of times every day. And I get to live my life more fruitfully because you guys are in it. Because I'm being formed by you, by the presence that you bring to me.
Well, and I love the application that the starting point is be curious about what you're withholding or holding back on. Yeah.
This was a really good start.
Yeah, it was. I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you guys next week.
All righty.
Good work.
Right on.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.